Today, I am joined by an incredible godly woman who is on a mission and has been helping women since 2008 to take steps towards healing and their pursuit of God, which I love so very much. She has been facilitating support groups specifically for partners of sex addicts since 2013, and she's been doing that both locally in Knoxville, which is close to my hometown, but also online through the Vicky Teed Ministries. Lyschel Burket is the lead Hope caster as well as the founder of Hope Redefined. And I love her heart. She has such a desire to be a part of something so much bigger as she continues to reach and strive to find the women who have stories which are very similar to her own. She and her husband, Garrett, have 5 children. They have been on the road to recovery since 2006. Today, we are going to discuss what recovery really looks like. So I hope you all will stick around for that. Godly women of the internet, welcome. I am so glad that you're joining us today. If this is your first time here, you are listening to the Godly Woman podcast, where we encourage women to walk in faith with the Heavenly Father and to carry on in their circumstances of whatever season of life they find themselves in. And how we do so is by having important conversations on the virtual porch swing about life, business, ministry, relationships, and what being a godly woman really looks like in today's world and for tomorrow. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome, girl. I am so excited to have you with us today and joining us. Welcome to the Godly Woman podcast. How are you?
Great. Thanks for inviting me into this.
Well, thank you for sitting down with me. I'm sad about the topic that we're discussing today, that it's even an issue, but I am thankful that there are resources because of people like you pushing it out in the world. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So tell us about your story, how you got involved in supporting and coaching women who are impacted by sexual betrayal.
Sure. So my name's Lyschel Burket, and I am the executive director and founder of a ministry called Hope Redefined. We actually just turned 4 years old in June. We've been doing full-time ministry since 2018 and support women all over the world navigating betrayal in their marriages and relationships.
Wow.
And so the ministry was birthed out of my own story and my own pain and my own need to find community. My husband's story and struggle with pornography came out in our marriage about 18 months into our marriage. And it was kind of I'll just give you the story so you can kind of hear how we got here. So we were relatively new believers. My husband grew up in church. I did not. So I will say that pornography wasn't unfamiliar to me. I didn't grow up, like I said, churched. So there was pornography around. But when we got married, we both had committed our lives to Christ and we're living what we would consider a Christian marriage. And so we were actually at a church service one Sunday, and there was a friend of ours who was actually in a small group with us. He had offered to share his testimony in what we called Big Church. And so he was in the main sanctuary, shared this with the congregation about his own personal struggle with pornography. And as we were driving home, I was just really blown away by this guy's vulnerability and transparency, and had that moment where I was just like, oh, wow, this is amazing. I can't believe he was so vulnerable about that. And then I had this moment and I just looked at my husband. I was like, well, you don't struggle with porn, right? He's like, no. But I was like, I didn't think so. Like, I think I would know that you struggle with porn, but I don't know. I just thought I should ask. He's like, yeah, no. So he just kind of blew me off and blew the situation off, which I didn't realize was what was happening. But then later that evening, he actually came back to me and he began to confess that he did in fact struggle with porn. He felt like God was convicting him of his behaviors and choices. And to really give some background to that, he truly had been wrestling and I guess he would say struggling with porn since he was about 9 or 10 years old. It was something that was introduced to him through friends and finding somebody's stash of magazines back in the 80s and 90s.
Sure.
And it just became what he calls a really crappy friend. And this was a place that he would go when his world was overwhelming. He was bored, he was tired, any emotion could potentially send him to this space to just want to disconnect from the world.
Wow.
And so I did not recognize that any of that was really happening or going on. And so in that confession, he said, I want to go to that guy's group that the guy was talking about at church. And I thought, well, that's great. That's awesome. Go to the group. We'll never talk about this again. Because I truly thought that the group was going to fix him and life was going to move on and we were going to be good. And for some part of that, it did. But then for other parts of it, it didn't. Eventually he had a relapse. It didn't last super long. That's what we would call now sobriety. It was about 4 months later. He went on a work trip, ended up looking at porn while he was on the work trip. And this is when I affectionately refer to my story that I lost my ever loving mind, because that is probably when I felt like betrayal really set in for me. I was willing to be his advocate, his supporter, his cheerleader. But then it was like, but I felt like we had made an agreement that we were done with that. He was done with that. So when the relapse happened, it was like, wait, you're not holding up to the agreement. So we, that really kind of moved us into a different season of life where suddenly he's having to spend more time with accountability partners and doing group work and all these things and workbooks. And I just felt really lost. I had support. I had friendships, but most people didn't know what to do with me, or I didn't even know how to ask for help. I didn't know how to process. There were so many days where I was like, I can't tell people about this. What would they think about him? What would they think about me? I felt like there were some people I would go talk to and I thought, oh, this is a trusted person. And they just didn't even know what to say, and you get a lot of things that I think people are meaning well intended. But quite honestly, it just feels really, really lonely and very confusing. I had people say, are you guys having enough sex? Is this, are you just not connecting well? Those types of things. And what I know now that I didn't know in this season was sex has nothing to do with this. Even though it's called sexual addiction or sexual struggles, it really doesn't have anything to do with the lack of sex or the amount of sex. It's just, it's actually an emotional dysfunction, I guess is what I would call it. So that led me into, obviously really, uncertain seasons. I did eventually find some really safe friends who just did messy life. And so I was allowed to be messy with them, which was awesome. But I would say on the backside of that, I still wasn't really sure what to do with me. I didn't know how to heal from this. So I just kept thinking, well, when he gets better, I'll get better. And he was getting better, but I wasn't getting better. I was still running around comparing myself to everybody. I was still not trusting him. I was still carrying shame about things. I was still trying to perform my way into being lovable enough that you would never go do those things. So it started to create a real sense of dysfunction for us. And I just kept crying out to the Lord. I'm like, I don't know what to do with me. And so like I mentioned, I did have some safe communities, so I would tap into them and they would definitely support me where they could. And so I started finding healing, but really it came mostly through the Lord. It was all about my relationship and him talking to me about my identity and who I was and the value I brought to the world that was completely disconnected from my husband's story. Which was an amazing gift. So my husband had sobriety for about 5.5 years. And in that time, we started having kids and started a family. And our youngest child at the time was 6 months old, and my husband had a major relapse. And so he actually got caught looking at work and had to come home and tell me that he was about to lose his job. And at the time, we had a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 6-month-old. And I was home. I had walked away from my career to be home with the kids. And I share that because it was such a pivotal point in our story. It was It was a moment where I had to enforce boundaries that I didn't want to do. I didn't want him to leave. I was in such a place of being a new mom and desperate for the extra set of hands. I didn't want that, but I needed to. And that was probably some of the most intimate days and nights I've ever had with God, is letting him be the one who's going to protect me and keep me safe and lead me and do all the things and show up for me like a husband would show up.
Right.
Even when my earthly husband was not in a position to be able to do that. So after that major relapse and the dust started to settle, I really felt the Lord starting to ask me to go share my story. And my first response was, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not talking to other people. But he really was adamant. And so I ended up launching a small group at my church for other women. I just was like, okay, I can make a safe place for other women to come together and we can just be community for one another. Because I knew I couldn't be by myself, even though I didn't know how to find anybody. I knew I wasn't alone. And so that led to me running a support group for a couple of years. It was about 4.5 years at our church. And then eventually felt the Lord calling me to do this in a bigger capacity and go back to school. So I went back, I became a professional coach. Awesome. I have a certification with a group called APSAT, specifically for betrayal trauma, which then led to birthing Hope Redefined. So,
wow. Yeah. Wow. That's phenomenal. Oh my goodness. Oh, wow. So many things.
Right.
So for our listeners who are not sure if they fall into this category or not of sex addiction or betrayal or not, can you give us some language to that just for clarification? If somebody's like, because it can look different for everybody.
Absolutely. So sex addiction, by basic definition, someone would qualify them, someone would give him an assessment or give a person an assessment of saying, is this in fact an addiction versus a struggle?
Sure.
Struggle. And I think that, we as people who are struggling with bad coping skills in life, we like to use the word struggle because it doesn't feel quite as detrimental as addiction. Right. And so, for years, my husband called it a struggle. And then eventually he finally, when he realized the struggle didn't go away, he recognized that this was actually something I'm addicted to. Like I return to it on a pretty consistent basis. So sex addiction doesn't mean you look at it every day. It doesn't even necessarily mean that you look at it every week. But what it does mean is that it is a place that you're going that is allowing you to disconnect and separate yourself from the rest of the world. And trying to cope or not cope with the hard things of life. And so those are the things we go towards. So I can relate that to food, right? Like I could say that I have a sugar addiction. I go there when I'm feeling happy, mad, sad, bored, tired, is like, I just want a piece of chocolate. Exactly. So, and I know that I don't want that to minimize like the impact of sex addiction to chocolate, but it does help a lot of times for women to be like, okay, I'm starting to put the dots together. So now, the other question you asked was about betrayal trauma and betrayal. Like, what is that? And so betrayal is what it is it's when a situation doesn't go in the direction that it was supposed to go. And so we all experience some semblance of betrayal in our stories. And it's a lot of it's called relational betrayal, right? So we may have that in our childhood. Our parents didn't show up or be parents the way that our unspoken definition of parents should be. And there's a hurt and a pain and a grief that comes with that disappointment. A lot of times people can attach that word to it. And so the same thing is true, whether it's with your parents, it's also with your spouse, is this isn't how this was supposed to go. And you've made a choice that's really impacted me. And that has created betrayal. So betrayal trauma is really the arena that we give most women who are navigating some sense of sexual brokenness in their marriage and their relationship. There are very common traumatic responses that happen in the aftermath of finding out or discovering or busting him again. that we will default or we will fall into some of these things. And so that looks like, just for listeners to have some definition, like, well, how do I know if I have betrayal trauma? You can Google it now, because thank goodness you can look it up and find some good videos and things online. But common things that you're going to see is a hyperarousal or a hypoarousal, which means you jump in and you're just your brain feels like it's on fire. There's tons of anxiety. You don't know how to function through the day. That's more of a hyper. Sometimes women will describe it as like, I literally am so obsessive about everything. I don't know how to not panic. I need him to be close to me, but then I also want to punch him in the throat. Like, they can't figure out where they're at.
Right.
And that's a lot of that, this jointedness that we feel. Women will talk about feeling depression, anxiety. You'll see them have responses like weight loss, hair loss, inability to sleep, inability to eat. They're just struggling to function in the day.
Yeah.
And the truth underneath all that is, it makes sense, because when a woman discovers that her husband is acting out sexually in whatever form or fashion, whether it's pornography, whether it is another physical human being, whether it's even online behavior, online relationships and affairs, she is navigating the death of something that she thought was true and real. And so when we don't give women the space to heal like that, we have a lot of bad side effects that come from it. And so that's what we get to do as a ministry, is walk with women and talk about, what does her healing look like, regardless if he ever gets better.
Exactly.
Which no woman really wants to sit in that camp.
Sure.
But the truth is that Jesus died on the cross for each of us as individuals.
Exactly.
And we both have healing that we get to do. So my husband has his own healing journey and I have mine. And it's the beautiful thing about being married, is that we can do it and it looks different, but we can still support each other in the healing process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Man, good stuff. Good stuff. So, COVID was a whole situation. So, the isolation from that everybody walked through, have you seen the numbers of sexual addiction jump in what you're doing day to day? Has that had any effect on it?
Absolutely. Most definitely. I mean, if you were watching or connected to any sense of news media, I mean, they were making reports about Pornhub use, like, going through the roof during COVID.
Right.
And which was so disheartening and so difficult to really think about. But on the backside of it, it correlates with what we know to be true about sex addiction and sexual acting out.
Right.
Because so many people felt powerless, confused, scared, out of control. And so those are the coping skills that they've learned over the course of time to go avoid life, is to just go view porn. Right. For us as a ministry, we weren't really sure what was going to happen.
Sure.
But our numbers really did start to increase. And I think that came down to, a lot of women said, I've been avoiding this for a while. Like, I kind of knew there was something going on, but now that I'm stuck in this house with him, I can't ignore it anymore and I need help. And so it kind of like forced them to face off with it and be like, I got to do something about it.
Exactly.
I think other women didn't know that it was still operating. A lot of times you'll hear the phrase, it went underground, which just means that he was just not being truthful about it. And so then while they were in isolation and lockdown, she discovers that he's still actively doing something. And so that really pushed women out to start asking for help. Sure. And I also think just the influx of like the media really talking about mental health and self-care and all those things that were super important while we were trying to navigate the unknown. I think that helped a lot of women say, I think this is a place I need help.
Right.
So.
Absolutely. So you had mentioned earlier, 80s and 90s, the magazines. Well, flash forward to today and hello, we have smartphones. So how much would you say that smartphones versus the magazines, how has that changed the whole game?
Substantially. unfortunately. So, the thing that we know now is that guys who are probably now even in their early 30s have never lived in a world without a smartphone.
Sure.
Most of them, the smartphone came out about when they were 10 or 11 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they're seeing is they're seeing an increase in all kinds of problematic areas. They're seeing an increase in child on child sexual assault. Mm-hmm. They're seeing an increase in aggressive sexual behavior. Mm-hmm. And of course, we're seeing an increase in the accessibility to porn, right? And so I've had multiple conversations with young adult pastors, family and marriage pastors, those types of things. And they'll say, it's not a matter of, like, I had this one guy who was doing premarital counseling. And so I asked him, I was like, hey, what does this conversation look like for you when you have couples? And he goes, well, it's not a matter of if there's porn. It's a matter of how bad is it?
Wow.
And so you see, there's been this massive shift of like, it's there. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of to what level does this thing have power and control? Right. The other thing that we're noticing is that those who, with the accessibility, our tech world is really smart. They know what they're doing. And so this is why even like the reels on Instagram are so addictive, and you'll sit and blow 20 minutes because they know exactly how long they need to keep you before they give you another hit of something new to keep it going and going and going. Exactly. The same is true with porn. I mean, they have that algorithm. They're making it work. And what they're doing is they're taking it just a little bit step further, a little further, a little further. So then you're beginning to see a real uptick in aggressive assault-like pornography and a lot of other distorted things that are being available now, because what used to be a still image in a magazine can't just be a still image in a magazine anymore. Now it's got to be this
flashy.
It's got, a lot more.
Right.
So,
kids being born today, they will not know a world without technology. So what can we do to protect them as much and as long as possible?
Yeah. So, we now have 5 kids. Mm-hmm. My oldest is 13. We've got a 13, 11, 10, 8, and 5. Mm-hmm. Right. So I got a gamut of middle schoolers down to my youngest is starting kindergarten.
Right.
And so while I can't say, oh, I've navigated all the years because I'm still a young mom with everyone else, I think the win is talking about it. Because that is most often, that is one of the biggest things you'll hear guys talk about when they talk about their struggle, is that no one talked to them about the consequences. It was more or less just don't get caught.
Right. And
so it was kind of like, and you have to take that in consideration that, as young adults, our brain is still developing. We're very egocentric. But on the backside of it, it was like, I had one guy, client of ours, that said my mom would find stuff all the time and she would say nothing. But I knew she found it. But that was what communicated to me was just don't get caught.
Wow.
And so it was just for him, there was a real sadness about that. Like, why didn't she step in and have a hard conversation with me, even if I was going to be aggressive about it, but at least she would have said something.
Right. Exactly.
And so that's the thing that I'm always encouraging my mom friends and women who ask me about what do we do with our kids. It's like, we've got to talk about it. I'll give you a couple of resources real quick. There's a book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures.
Okay.
And you can get on Amazon. There's actually 2 versions. There's a junior version, and then there's more that's geared towards middle school, high school kids.
Okay.
Probably middle school. If you haven't talked to your kids about porn since they got to high school, you better sit down really quick because it's happening. But the junior version is really great for kids. It looks just like any other kid's book. Mm-hmm. But what it begins to do is give them definition of body awareness. Mm-hmm. And it talks about what is a good picture and what is a bad picture and what do I do with a bad picture. And so it lays it out like if you remember fire safety, it was stop, drop, and roll.
Right.
we were given that little thing, that phrase or whatever. So the author did something very similar.
That's awesome.
In a plan that should they come across porn, this is the plan that they need to execute. Because I think that's probably one of the bigger misses, right? Is
yes,
we just for a
no
lot
language.
Of yeah, and I didn't know what to do with it. I saw it. It made me feel awful and yucky, and I didn't know what to do with it. Then I didn't know who to talk to, or I didn't want to talk to somebody because I was embarrassed.
Right.
And so it is about having those transparent conversations. I would also say that the other thing that helps kids be really confident in this space is talking about sex at a very young age. And when I mean sex, we're going to talk about their body parts. We're going to talk about gender. We're going to talk about marriage. We're going to talk about all these different things that play into what is sex. What does honoring look like? And there's a lot of great resources. There's another one called Empowerment Kids, and it's a brand, and you can get on there and they have a book for various age ranges to have conversations to talk to your kids about sex.
Excellent.
So
that's awesome. Great resources for sure. Yeah. So, is there, if we have a spouse who is definitely on the struggle bus with this, is there anything as their spouse that we can do to help or support them without, shaming them and bringing harm to the relationship? How can we help them?
So I love and appreciate your question. And the first thing that came to mind was their behaviors cause shame. Us talking about it doesn't create shame. But that is the distortion that will come in, is when you talk about it, it makes me feel shame.
Right.
We're not causing the shame. Talking about it is causing the shame, or the truth behind everything is what's really causing the shame.
Right.
So first and foremost, that's like a tool or a gift I want to give women specifically as they're trying to figure out, how do I do this? Because we start to carry that, like, I don't want to make him feel shame.
Right.
But when a guy begins his own recovery and his healing journey, there's a moment in time where he'll stop having shame about his behaviors. When he starts to get to a place of identity, because shame is actually a language of the enemy. It's not even of God. So there's all that little sidetrack there. But how can we support them? I would say that, well, the kryptonite to addiction is being known, and it's community. And so if you're trying to figure out, okay, what does my husband need? I'm going to tell you he needs other people around him who know and are going to help hold him accountable.
Right.
And I don't mean, oh, his brother also struggled with this one time back in 1920, whatever, not 20s. Right. That's too far. He's dead. Anyway, but years ago, and they are friends, but they don't ever actually talk about the situation. Right. That's not really community that we're talking about. We're talking about getting in a support group. There's a ministry called Pure Desire that has groups all over the US for guys that they can tap into those as online groups. They can go to them locally, face-to-face groups. And they probably would be pleasantly surprised to see other guys that look just like them in there. And guys who are really hoping to find some freedom and not let this have so much power over them. So I would say encourage community, encourage that opportunity for growth, but also understand that even if he says no, it doesn't mean she can't heal.
Sure.
Even if he refuses to go get help, it doesn't mean that she doesn't have work to do to heal for herself.
Absolutely.
There's been impact.
So for anyone who for any church that might be listening who is thinking about providing resources within their church for people dealing with this, for women specifically, how common is this found in the church without being spoken of?
So common. And I hate to even say that. I'm like, So statistics show us right now that somewhere around 70%
Wow.
of Christian marriages are impacted by sexual brokenness, and
Incredible.
Specifically porn addiction or porn use, infidelity. If I were so bold to say, it is one of the most silent death sentences we have going on in the church right now, because churches aren't talking about it. They may bring up that porn is a sin. They might list it out in a moment as they're talking about it in a sermon or something to that extent, but the majority of the church doesn't really hold space to talk about why this is a problem. And part of that has to do with probably the church not really knowing what to do with it. That's traditionally what I hear is, we can't really talk about this because we're about to open a can of worms that we don't have resources for.
Right.
So as church leadership, I would advocate and say, find good referrals. We can't expect all of our pastors to be professionals in every possible way and know how to care for every situation that walks through that door. They've got parents who have kids with drug addictions. They have the infidelity. They have, kids with special needs. I mean, there's so much that's happening in our families. And so my encouragement would be that they will have a good referral list. And we would love to be on that list as an organization that they could say, look, I'm not exactly sure what you need, but I know that this ministry knows how to support. And so go and do that with them.
Absolutely. That's fantastic information. If we have a listener who is dealing with this head on, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, and they're struggling, and they're doing all the things, and they're having a hard time finding God in the middle of it because they're in the thick of it, and it's just like, what's happening? Can you speak to that?
Yeah. First of all, I'm going to say you're not alone. It's one of the hardest places to figure out how to insert Jesus in the middle of the muck. Yeah. Part of it comes from us living in a performance culture where Jesus is going to like being with me when I'm happy and I'm up and I'm doing, and he's not going to really want to be with me when I'm not, which it couldn't be further from the truth, right? When you really go back to scripture, you'll see that that's not true. But in our humanness and in our short-sightedness, we tend to think he's not here. I have also navigated my own seasons of feeling completely set up. Like, I prayed for this guy. I prayed for us. I prayed for healing. I prayed for all the things, and it didn't happen. Right. So now what? And so you feel there's a brokenness that happens in your faith. And I want to just say, like, that's okay. And it's one of the best things that I love about our ministry is being able to let women show up right where they are. There's no expectation that she's going to walk in and be like, I love Jesus and he's my best friend. Like, you're allowed to be mad at him. Right. I've been mad at him multiple times. And he's like, you know what he said to me? I'm really glad we're talking. Right. Cause I was like, I'm so mad at you. I don't even want to talk about it. He's like, I'm so glad we're talking. I'm like, don't change the subject. Right. Like, you just have that moment in your spirit and you're like, no. And it's because that's the desire of what you, if you read, when you start to sit in the gospel, it's like, it's intimacy every time.
Absolutely. And
so sometimes we just need to get in community and space that says to somebody, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be all the things. Feel them, because that's part of what holds us hostage, is a refusal to not feel what's going on. Right. We keep trying to box it up, package it up, make it look better so we can get through the day. We joke sometimes in our groups about, grief is one of the most missed experiences in betrayal trauma. We do not know that we have something to grieve, mostly because no one told us there was something to grieve. Right. There's no one walking this out with us, especially if you're in a marriage where nobody knows. You can't tell your parents, you can't tell your siblings, you can't tell your close friends. So all of a sudden you're carrying this completely by yourself. That's like having a cancer diagnosis and not telling anybody.
Absolutely.
And then feeling really trapped because nobody asks you how you are.
Exactly.
Because they don't know. And so being able to find community like that is one of the most vital first steps for women as they're trying to figure out, what do I do next? Because
Absolutely.
once you start getting that community, then you're going to start learning the other things like, what are the boundaries I need to have? What does self-care look like for me? How do I, is what I'm asking for appropriate? Is this too much? Like, are my expectations unrealistic? Because this is what he's telling me. That I expect perfection, and I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for honesty.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so it's those are places, that's the safety you're going to find in getting in good, healthy community with others.
Excellent. So for individuals, for churches or other ministries looking to gain resources in this department, how can we connect with you? What do you offer for both groups and individuals? And how can we continue to support you in everything that you're doing?
Oh, thanks. So you can reach out to us through our website. It's hoperedefined.org.
Okay.
And there's lots of good stuff on there. Our website is designed for a woman seeking help. So you're going to be able to kind of get a good understanding of what our support options look like. We do online groups. We also do one-to-one coaching support. We have a retreat that we facilitate and lead outside of Gatlinburg, Tennessee, twice a year. For women, it's a small retreat. We limit it to around 15 women. We also have an online community called Hope Online, and it's a separate platform. It's not attached to social media profiles. And that is another really safe place for women to be able to connect and get resources and learn and really step into the journey and also find a sisterhood that they didn't know that they needed. So that's another one. And then for churches and communities and, small group leaders and all the things, I'm always willing to have conversations and share resources and direct people in the right way. We've got some other incredible ministries that is exactly what they're doing, is they are building things and creating things to support churches in this area.
Excellent.
So it's an ongoing need for a lot of things, for manpower, hearts, passion, finances, resources, all the things. But so if a church has questions or wants to reach out and says, hey, how do we start a group here or something to that extent, I would love to be contacted and help them any way I can.
Excellent. Okay, final question.
Right.
If you had one piece of advice to give a godly woman, a fellow godly woman, struggling or not, any season of life, what would it be?
It would be that Jesus loves you. This I know. Find others who will remind you of that.
Amen. That is so good. Thank you so much for educating us and for helping us to get a better understanding of all the things related to this. Thank you for everything that you are doing and your ministry for the kingdom and for godly women everywhere. We appreciate you so very much for helping us keep our focus on the cross and the world behind us and enduring in our seasons of life. So thank you so much.
You bet.
So very much. We are so glad that you all joined us today. We hope that you have found this information helpful, or maybe you know somebody who also needs this information. We would love for you to share that with them as well. And remember, when you walk with Jesus, you do have the strength to carry on. We'll see y'all next time. Bye.
Oh, the power of a godly woman. You got the strength to carry on. We walk in faith with the Heavenly Father. We'll take your name to